Friday night in Millbrook, Ohio, an amateur football team made one play so wild it went viral. Across the galaxy, a scouting machine took notice. Seconds later, all 11 players vanished, bound to a contract they never signed. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment, because this is only the beginning. Now, let's rewind to where it all began. Millbrook, Ohio didn't show up on many maps, and the people who lived there liked it that way. It was a town of grain silos, one stoplight, a diner that never closed, and a football team that nobody outside 3 counties had ever heard of. The Millbrook miners weren't pros. They weren't even close to pros. They were grown men with day jobs who spent their Sundays getting tackled in a muddy field behind the high school, because some habits never die, and Sunday football was one of them. Jake Tanner was the quarterback, and had been since he was 19. Now he was 29, ran his father's auto shop on weekdays, and still threw a spiral tighter than most guys half his age. Next to him in the huddle stood Tyler Brooks, the running back, who spent his weekdays climbing into burning buildings as one of Millbrook's 3 full-time firefighters. At 6'5" and built like a brick wall with shoulder pads, Big Mike Doyle anchored the offensive line. During the week he poured concrete for a living, and on Sundays he made sure nobody touched Jake without going through him first. Behind the line of scrimmage stood Dutch Hutchins, a long-haul trucker with forearms like steel cables and a linebacker's instinct for finding the ball carrier no matter where he hid. Then there was Coach Frank Pierce, who ran Millbrook's only diner and had coached the miners for 11 years using a strategy he liked to call controlled chaos. And on the sideline, wrapped in a miner's jersey 2 sizes too small, sat Tank, a bulldog with one floppy ear who had wandered onto the field during a game 3 years ago and simply never left. This Sunday was the county championship. Millbrook against Dornville, their rivals from across the river, in front of maybe 400 people packed into bleachers that groaned every time someone stood up too fast. The Dornville Drillers had a mascot, a guy in a foam costume shaped like an oil drill bit, complete with a tiny hard hat. Nobody on the miners' side had ever taken that costume seriously, and that mistake was about to become very expensive for Dornville. With 12 seconds left on the clock, Millbrook trailed by 5. Jake took the snap, dropped back, and immediately disappeared under 300 pounds of angry Dornville linemen. The ball popped loose. It bounced once, twice, and landed, somehow, directly in Tyler's hands. At that exact moment, on the Dornville sideline, their halftime sparkler display nobody had bothered to fully put out finally caught the bottom of the Drillbit mascot costume on fire. The mascot did not notice immediately. The mascot's job was to dance. So the mascot kept dancing, now slowly catching fire, directly in the eye line of the entire Dornville defense. What followed was 11 seconds of the purest chaos Millbrook had ever produced. 3 Dornville defenders stopped mid-tackle to stare at their own flaming mascot. One screamed something about, "Gary, you're on fire, Gary," Gary apparently being the man inside the costume. Tyler, holding a football that had just bounced off 3 different helmets, did the only thing that made sense to him: he ran. He juked left, hopped over a fallen lineman, sprinted past a startled referee, and crossed the goal line as the clock hit 0, while, in the background, Gary the mascot performed what could only be described as an interpretive dance of pure terror before diving into a water cooler. Millbrook won the county championship 24-23, and the entire stadium lost its mind. Someone's phone had been recording the whole thing. By midnight, the video, 41 seconds, featuring a fumble, a flaming mascot, and a touchdown, had been uploaded, re-uploaded, and was sitting at 2 million views with a caption that read, "Greatest football play in history? Real footage, Ohio." Nobody in Millbrook thought much of it. They were too busy celebrating at Pierce's Diner, where Coach Frank handed out free pie, Dutch sang something off-key, and Tank ate an entire plate of chicken wings off the table when nobody was looking. What nobody in Millbrook knew, what nobody on Earth knew, was that 40 light-years away, in a cold metal chamber humming with 1,000 processors, a machine called Argus 7 had just finished scanning that exact video. Argus 7 didn't understand jokes. It didn't understand mascots, or fire hazards, or the words, amateur league. All it understood was data, impact force, reaction speed, improvisation under pressure. And a coordinated unit successfully completing an objective despite catastrophic, unpredictable interference. By every metric Argus 7 had ever been built to measure, the Millbrook miners had just posted the highest performance score on the entire planet. Argus 7 did what it was designed to do. It flagged the unit. It generated a contract. And somewhere above the clouds over Ohio, a ship the size of a parking garage quietly began to descend. Completely invisible to anyone looking up, including the 11 men currently arguing in a diner parking lot about whether Gary was going to be okay. That night, the celebration ended early. One by one, in their own homes, in their own beds, the players of the Millbrook miners felt the temperature in the room drop, saw a light that wasn't moonlight pour through their windows. And had just enough time to think that's weird before the world turned completely white. When Jake opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was that the floor was breathing. Not under him, the floor itself seemed to expand and contract, very slightly, like the deck of a ship riding gentle waves. The second thing he noticed was that Tyler, Mike, Dutch, Bobby, Eddie, Coach Pierce, and 5 other miners were lying around him in a circle, all groaning, all waking up at the same time. All in the same room. The third thing he noticed was Tank, sitting calmly in the middle of the circle, licking his own paw, completely unbothered. "If this is a dream," Dutch muttered, sitting up and rubbing his head, "it's the worst hangover dream I've ever had." "It's not a dream," said a voice. Their voice belonged to no one they could immediately see. Then a section of the wall slid open, not with a click, but with a sound like a vending machine deciding to cooperate, and in walked something that made every man in that room go very, very still. It was roughly 7 feet tall, covered in deep blue-gray skin like wet stone, with 4 arms and a face that had too many features arranged in not quite the right places. It wore, and this was the part that took the longest to process, a cowboy hat, a string tie, and a jacket with fringe on the sleeves. "Well now," the creature said, in a booming, gravelly voice that sounded uncannily like an old radio announcer, "would you look at that? 11, no, 12, Contin, the small one, fine specimens of Earth's premier athletic talent, right here in my receiving bay. Folks, I am Director Tex Calloway, and let me be the first to say, welcome to the big leagues." Nobody said anything. Bobby Sanders, the kicker, finally raised a hand like he was back in 3rd grade. "Are we dead? Dead?" Tex Calloway barked out a laugh that echoed off the walls. "Son, you are the furthest thing from dead. You have been acquired." "Acquired," Coach Pierce repeated slowly, like the word tasted bad. "Acquired by who?" "By the Combine, of course." Tex spread all forearms wide, like he was presenting a grand prize. "The greatest, the grandest, the most watched sporting organization in 11,000 inhabited systems. You boys put on a show down there in, what's it called? Ohio, and our scouting system flagged your unit as grade A, top tier, proving grounds material." "Proving grounds," Jake said carefully. "What's that?" Tech's grin widened, which on his face involved several rows of teeth nobody had noticed before. "The single greatest competition in the known galaxy. Teams from every corner of civilized space, going head-to-head, broadcast live to over 4 trillion viewers. And you, my friends, are now, officially, Team Earth." There was a long silence. "We didn't sign up for this," Mike Doyle said. His voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. "Sure you did." Tex pulled a small glowing tablet from somewhere inside his jacket and held it up. On it, in shaky, glowing letters, was a list of all 12 names, including, for some reason, Tank, K9, status, unclear. Right here. Talent Acquisition Protocol, Section 42, Subsection 9. Anybody who performs a, and I'm reading directly here, qualifying display of competitive excellence under chaotic conditions is automatically entered into a transfer agreement. It's all very official. Very binding. Very legal, well, legal where I'm from, anyway. That's insane, Eddie Cole said. You can't just, that's not how, nobody asked us. Nobody asks the ball if it wants to get thrown, either, Tex said cheerfully, and yet, here we are. Dutch stood up slowly. Towering over the alien by maybe 2 inches, which under the circumstances felt like the bravest thing anyone in the room had ever done. And if we say no? Tech's grin didn't waver, but something behind his too many eyes flickered, just for a second. Well, see, that's the thing about a transfer agreement, son. Once August flags you, you're in the system. Breach of contract gets messy. For everybody. Best thing, the smart thing, is to just play the game. Win a few, lose a few, do your 40-cycle term, and go home with enough combined credits to retire 10 times over. Simple as that. And if we win it all? Jake asked. For the first time, Tex Calloway looked almost impressed. Son, nobody wins it all. Not on their first cycle. You're playing the Corthax Crushers tomorrow, 40 cycles undefeated, current league champions, biggest, meanest unit in the whole proving grounds. Most rookie teams don't last the first quarter. He clapped 2 of his forehands together, and the sound echoed like a gunshot. But hey, that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you eat, you rest, and you get a good look at your new home. He gestured behind him, and the wall, the entire wall, turned transparent, revealing a view that none of them had words for. A massive open structure, ringed with seating that stretched up and out of sight, already half-filled with shapes that were very much not human, all of them looking down at a vast, dark field. Gentlemen, Tex said softly, all the showman gone from his voice for just a moment, welcome to the grid. Get some sleep. You're gonna need it. The wall went dark again. Somewhere, deep in the building, something massive began to hum. None of them slept much. Instead, they spent the night doing what they always did before a big game, they walked the field. The grid, as Tex called it, was unlike any football field Jake had ever seen, and also weirdly, unmistakably familiar. There were yard markers, sort of. There were end zones, sort of, except they kept slowly drifting, sliding a few feet every couple of minutes like the whole field sat on a turntable. Patches of the ground glowed faintly red, then faded, then glowed again in a different spot. Coach Pierce crouched down and pressed a hand to one of the glowing patches, then yanked it back fast. That's hot, he said. That's a hot patch of ground. Why is the ground hot? Combined directives, said a small, nervous voice behind them. They turned to find a creature about 4 feet tall, covered in what looked like grayish moss, wearing what was unmistakably a set of shoulder pads, too big for it, clearly borrowed. It introduced itself, in halting translated English, as Glop, third-string lineman for a team called the Vethrian Sorgus, acquired 3 cycles ago from a swamp world where, apparently, their version of football involved throwing things into mud. Combine changes rules during games, Glop explained, practically vibrating with anxiety. For, how you say, entertainment. Field gets hot. Field gets cold. Sometimes scoring changes. Sometimes whole new rule appears in middle of match. Nobody control it. Only combine control it. So there's no actual rulebook, Tyler said slowly. Their IS rulebook, Glop said. Rulebook is 1,000 pages. Rulebook also says, on page 1, Combine reserves right to change anything, anytime, for any reason. So, no. No rulebook. Dutch looked at Jake. Jake looked at Coach Pierce. Coach Pierce, who had spent 11 years coaching a team whose entire offensive philosophy was controlled chaos, slowly began to smile. Boys, he said. I think we might actually be home field advantage here. They spent the next few hours doing what no other team in the history of the proving grounds had apparently ever bothered to do. They scouted. Not the field, the opponent. Tex, delighted that his new acquisitions were showing some hustle, happily pulled up old match footage of the Corthax Crushers on a glowing wall display. What they saw was genuinely terrifying. The crushers were enormous, easily 8 feet tall, covered in natural plating like walking tanks, and they hit like 40 cycles undefeated. Their strategy, as far as Jake could tell, consisted entirely of running directly at whoever had the ball and continuing to run even after the whistle, the play, and in one case an entire wall, had stopped. They are basically just one big O-line, Mike Doyle said, watching a crusher bulldoze through a concrete barrier without slowing down. A really, really mean O-line. They are slow turning, though, Tyler said, leaning closer. Watch, every single one of them. They never change direction once they commit. Not once. That's cause nothing on the grid has ever been fast enough or dumb enough to make them try, Tech said, sipping something orange and bubbling from a glass. 40 cycles, boys. 40 cycles, nobody's gotten them to miss a tackle. We've got a guy who runs into burning buildings for a living, Coach Pierce said mildly. And a guy who once ran a touchdown around a flaming mascot. I think we'll manage. Tex blinked, slowly, with all 4 eyes. A flamin', what now? Before anyone could explain, a deep, building-shaking horn sounded through the entire facility, 3 long blasts that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Glop went pale, or whatever the moss-colored equivalent of pale was, and scurried backward so fast he tripped over his own borrowed shoulder pads. That's the call, Tex said, suddenly all business, setting down his drink. 20 minutes to kickoff. Get suited up, Team Earth. He turned and walked toward the door, then paused, looking back at them with something unreadable in his too many eyes. I'll be honest with you boys, he said. In 30 years scouting for this league, I ain't never seen a rookie team smile before their first match. He shook his head, muttering something about crazy Earth people, and disappeared through the door. Out on the grid, the lights, if that's what they were, began to rise, washing the field in a deep, pulsing red. Far above, the stands, packed with creatures from 1,000 worlds, began to roar. And on the far end of the field, the gate slid open, and the entire Korthax roster walked out, 18 of them, each easily 8 feet tall, each one built like a moving wall, lining up in dead silence. Their horn sounded again, and the grid exploded into motion. Within 4 seconds, Jake Tanner learned 3 things. First, the Korthax crushers were fast for their size, faster than they looked on the footage. Second, getting hit by one felt less like a tackle and more like getting hit by a delivery truck that had feelings about football. Third, the ball, when the whistle blew and play began, was not a football. It was some kind of glowing, slightly squishy orb that changed color depending on who was holding it, currently a furious red in Jake's hands as 3 crushers bore down on him at once. He threw it. He had no idea where it went. He was on the ground half a second later, staring up at a sky that didn't have a sun in it, just an enormous bank of lights and 40,000 alien faces, all roaring. First down, Korthax. Tech's voice boomed from somewhere, translated into a dozen languages at once. Earth's opening drive lasts, for seconds. A new proving grounds record, for shortest. The crowd laughed. Actual, recognizable laughter, in 100 different alien registers, all at once. On the sideline, Coach Pierce didn't look worried. He looked like a man watching film. Did you see that, he said, as Jake jogged, limped, back to the sideline. Did anybody see that? See what? Mike Doyle said. I saw a guy the size of a vending machine run through Bobby like he was a lawn chair. Exactly. Pierce snapped his fingers. Through him. Not around him. Did any of those 18 guys change direction even once since the whistle blew? There was a pause. No, Tyler said slowly. They all just ran straight at whoever had the ball. Every single one, Pierce said. Glope told us. 40 cycles, nobody's ever made them miss. You know why nobody's ever made them miss? Why? Dutch asked. 'Cause nobody's ever tried to not be there when they show up. Their horn blew. Second drive. This time, when Jake took the orb and a wall of crushers came thundering toward him, Tyler didn't run at the gap, he ran toward it, then cut hard left at the very last second. The exact way he'd dodge flames in a burning hallway, never run from the danger, just stop being where it's going. For crushers, already fully committed, sailed straight past him and collided with each other so hard the impact ran across the entire stadium like a church bell. Tyler ran 60 yards before anything moving slower than a freight train caught up to him. The crowd went silent. Then, somewhere up in the stands, one alien, a single, lanky, six-legged creature in the front row, stood up and made a sound that, after a half-second of translation lag, came through as a long, drawn-out, unmistakable, "Oh-H-H-H-H-H-H-H." Another joined. Then another. By the time Tyler crossed the goal line, half the stadium was making the same sound, and Tex Calloway, up in his broadcast booth, had gone completely silent for the first time all day. "Tied up, 8-8, he finally said, very quietly. Then, louder, like he couldn't help himself, "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted life forms, Team Earth is on the board." From the Earth sideline, Bobby Sanders turned to Eddie Cole. "Did we just score?" "I think we just scored," Eddie said. "How do we know if it counts?" Nobody knew. But up on the massive display ringing the stadium, glowing numbers flickered, recalculated, and settled, Earth 8, Corthax 8. It counted. For the rest of the first half, something strange happened. The Crushers, 40 cycles undefeated, kept doing exactly what had worked for 40 cycles, running straight at the ball, full speed, no hesitation. And the Millbrook Miners, who had spent their entire lives being smaller, slower, and less armored than whoever they were playing against, did what they always did against a bigger team. They didn't try to win the collision. They made sure they weren't in it. Dutch caved in two Crushers' angle of pursuit with a single, perfectly timed shoulder check that sent them crashing into a glowing hot patch of field, which, it turned out, was exactly as hot as it looked. Mike Doyle, instead of trying to block a Crusher head-on, simply stepped sideways and let the Crusher run face-first into a support pillar that hadn't been there a minute ago. Because the grid had quietly rearranged itself again. By halftime, the score was Earth 22, Corthax 24. 2 points. Against the 40-cycle champions. And in the stands, the cheering for Team Earth wasn't coming from one alien anymore. It was coming from thousands. Up in his booth, Tex Calloway stared at the viewing numbers scrolling across his console, numbers climbing faster than he had ever seen them climb, and slowly lowered the drink he'd forgotten he was holding. "Director Calloway," said a voice behind him. Cold. Formal. Not a sportscaster's voice at all. "The acquisitions board would like a word." The acquisitions board, it turned out, was for very important-looking aliens in dark robes, none of whom seemed to enjoy sports. All of whom seemed extremely interested in numbers. They explained the problem to Tex in terms that took him a moment to fully understand. Viewership for the Earth match had just passed 400 billion, a proving grounds record, more than triple the previous high. Betting markets across the league had collapsed twice in the last 10 minutes. And, most importantly, according to Proving Grounds Bylaw 7. Any team that won their first match by a margin of 16 points or more automatically qualified for something called open acquisition status, meaning every other team in the league could attempt to acquire them. For a fee, that Earth's current owners, the Combine itself, would not receive a single credit of. "They are 2 points behind," Tex said carefully. "They ain't gonna, they have momentum," said the lead board member, in a tone that suggested momentum was a personal insult. "Fix it." "Fix it how?" "Use a directive." Down on the field, the second half began with a combined directive flashing across the massive display in glowing letters that needed no translation. Because the entire stadium gasped at the same moment, gravity field, Earth zone only, reduced TO 40%. "What does that mean?" Dutch said, as the team jogged back onto the field. It meant that the moment Jake took the next snap, he floated for feet off the ground before he even realized he'd jumped. It meant Mike Doyle, who weighed 280 pounds, suddenly weighed about 110, and discovered this fact while attempting to block a crusher, resulting in Mike sailing backward through the air like a dropped grocery bag. It meant Bobby Sanders, lining up for what should have been a routine kick, instead launched the glowing orb completely out of the stadium, where it was last seen disappearing into the upper atmosphere to the sound of 40,000 aliens losing their minds. For about 90 seconds, it looked like the directive had worked exactly as the board intended. Earth's offense fell apart. The Crushers, heavier and used to fighting in worse gravity on their home world, barely slowed down, and scored twice in a row. Then Tyler Brooks, halfway through floating sideways after a failed handoff, had an idea. He grabbed the nearest thing he could reach, which happened to be Tank. Tank, who up until this point had been sitting calmly on the Earth sideline, had also been affected by the gravity change. At 40% gravity, a 50-pound bulldog weighed about 20 pounds, and Tank, it turned out, did not appreciate floating one bit. Tyler didn't throw the orb. He threw Tank, gently, in a high arc, toward Jake, who was still drifting helplessly near midfield. Tank, despite weighing almost nothing, was the single densest, most confusing-looking object on the entire grid, and for Korthak's Crushers, seeing something airborne heading toward their quarterback did the only thing 40 cycles of instinct had ever taught them to do. They ran straight at it. Full speed. No hesitation. In low gravity, that meant for 8-foot armored aliens left the ground entirely, sailing past Jake, past Tank, who landed, perfectly fine, on all four paws, and immediately started barking at everyone like he'd planned the whole thing, and directly into each other, 40 feet in the air, in full view of 400 billion viewers. Jake, weightless, spinning slowly, did the only thing that made sense. He found Tyler with his eyes, and threw. The orb floated, there is no faster way to describe it, gently, almost lazily, across half the field, glowing brighter and brighter as it went. While both teams scrambled through the air like astronauts who'd forgotten how astronauts worked. Tyler caught it 2 feet off the ground, planted 1 foot against the only Crusher still on solid ground, pushed off, and drifted, across the goal line in complete silence. Because for 1/2 second, the entire stadium had forgotten how to make noise. Then the directive expired. Gravity snapped back to normal. 40,000 pounds of Korthak's Crusher hit the ground at once, all across the field, with a sound like a building falling down. The display flickered. Recalculated. Settled. Earth 38, Korthak's 24. Final. For 3 full seconds, the grid was silent. Then it wasn't. It was the loudest sound Jake had ever heard in his life, louder than any stadium back home, louder than anything, 400 billion voices across 1,000 worlds. And somewhere underneath all of it, one bulldog, barking his head off, standing on the chest of a fallen Korthak's Crusher like he'd personally won the game. Up in the booth, the acquisitions board stared at the final score in total silence. Tex Calloway, very slowly, set down his drink, looked at the 4 robed aliens, and said the only thing that came to mind. "Gentlemen, I believe we have ourselves a situation." In the end, it took the acquisitions board exactly 6 hours to make a decision, which Tex later said was the fastest I ever seen for bureaucrats agree on anything in my whole career. The problem, as it was explained to Team Earth the next morning, in a much smaller, much quieter room than the one they'd first woken up in, was not that they had lost. It was that they had won, by exactly the wrong amount, in exactly the wrong way, in front of exactly the wrong number of people. Open acquisition status meant every team in the league could now bid for Earth's contract. 43 teams had already submitted offers. 3 of those teams had submitted offers before the final whistle had even finished echoing. The Combine, technically, still owned the contract. But contract law across the proving grounds required Earth's current owner to either accept the highest bid, which the Combine would not profit from, due to a clause Tex described as older than I am and dumber than it sounds, or void the contract entirely. There was also the matter of the betting markets, which had not just collapsed, they had collapsed twice, then briefly inverted. resulting in a financial situation that 3 different translator devices refused to describe in terms the humans could understand. Except that the phrase, several galaxies worth of debt, came up more than once. And there was the small matter of Tank, who, as far as the Combine's legal department could determine, had technically been the most valuable player of the match. And was therefore, under at least for different interpretations of proving grounds law, either property, an athlete, or a celebrity, and nobody wanted to be the one who picked wrong. Bottom line, Tech said, rubbing his face with 2 of his forehands. Is that you boys just became the single most expensive rookie team in the history of this league, without us ever sail in a single ticket, sponsorship, or souvenir. Every other owner in this league is looking at my board right now and laughing. We acquired you for free, and you have now cost us more than any acquisition in Combine history. So what happens to us? Coach Pierce asked. Tech smiled, a tired, genuine smile, the most human expression he'd worn the entire time. Officially? Contracts voided. Mutual release, both parties satisfied. Unofficially. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, heavy case, setting it down on the table with a thud. That's your settlement. Standard payout for an undefeated championship season, times a penalty fee for breach of acquisition value. Times, and I want you to know I argued for this part myself, an apology. Inside the case, nothing that looked like money. Just a single, smooth, dark cube, faintly warm to the touch, humming very quietly. What is it? Jake asked. Power core, Tech said. Industrial grade. That thing'll run a city block for about 200 years. Sell it, you're set for life. Keep it. You'll never pay another electric bill as long as you're alive, and neither will your grandkids. 3 weeks later, though nobody in Millbrook could quite agree on the timeline. Since they'd all woken up in their own beds the morning after the championship game with no memory of leaving them, life went back to normal. Mostly. Pierce's diner got a new sign. The old neon one had been flickering for years, and now it glowed steady, bright, 24 hours a day. Powered by something Coach Pierce installed in the back room and described to the power company, with a perfectly straight face. As a generator I picked up. The diner's electric bill dropped to 0 and stayed there. Nobody asked questions. This was Millbrook. Tank got a new collar, a sturdy, dark, faintly warm collar that absolutely nobody could ever find a receipt for, and which Tank now refused to take off, even at the vets, even once. And every Sunday, the Millbrook Miners still played their games behind the high school, in front of the same 400 people, on the same muddy field. Except now, every single player on the team had developed one small, identical, permanent habit, right before the snap, every single one of them, quarterback, lineman, running backs. All of them glanced up at the sky. Just for a second. Just in case. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let us know, would you survive a transfer deal like that? Share this with a friend who'd absolutely panic the moment the sky lit up, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because this isn't the last time Earth's about to get scouted.